you have had some time to rest and that you are ready for the next session, which is probably really going to be as interesting as the previous ones, and that you have many questions to ask, not to me, hopefully, but to him. We are very happy to have you here today, and in the name of the mosque, of the foundation of the mosque, and the people who run this mosque, we're very glad to have you. We're looking forward to begin a conversation amongst us, among all of us, that can lead us somewhere fruitful for everyone, and where we can all find a common ground, where we can stand together and establish what we know is good for us, good for the people around us, and good for the planet itself. After this brief introduction, as I said, thank you very much for coming. We're hoping that you will come back, and I leave you with Ramon, who's gonna say something very interesting.
Not necessary. Thank you. Thank you, Lukman. Salam alaikum to all. Wanted to basically thank the mosque and for opening the doors for this kind of conversations and these courses. This is for us really, we appreciate this gesture. That's a way for us also not only to know you and to know the community here. So thank you.
Okay.
So basically, I was asked to talk, about the history of Al-Andalus, and it's relevant to the fact of where we are. We are in a place that has historical significance, and therefore this has it's important also to know some of this history in relation to the kind of things that we're doing in these summer schools. One of the things that, first of all, this is, for those of you who know me or have heard me before, this kind of lecture takes me several hours, a few hours at least. So I'm not going to go into all the detail. We have only 1 hour. I'm going to be very compressed in my time-space presentation. I'm going to compress many information and just, be, in a sense, provocative in terms of some ideas. But anyway, I would like to say that the history of Al-Andalus usually is seen in the Muslim world in a kind of, let's put it this way, nostalgic or romantic way, and we all cry. We all cry by what happened, and it's still in the memory of the Ummah, what happened after the fall of Granada, etc. So Al-Andalus is usually seen in this way, in a nostalgic, romantic way. What I'm trying to do here is to present a history of Al-Andalus that we need to, in a sense, look at it as a world historical moment. That is, it's not just something that we're going to cry about or to look at it in a romantic way. It's a world historical moment because of what it meant at a global scale. Okay, the fall of Al-Andalus, and how the methods used in the fall of Al-Andalus, in the destruction, in the conquest of Al-Andalus, were globalized and taken to other parts of the world as part of the European colonial expansion. In a sense, the thesis I'm going to be working with the idea that the European colonial expansion began with the conquest of Al-Andalus. And you're going to see a lot of the methods used in the conquest of Al-Andalus being deployed elsewhere, and including till today. In the past 500 years, you could see many of these colonial methods globalized and used in many parts of the world. I'm going to discuss a little of that. We don't have that much time, but we need to say something very brief about the past. to understand the world historical significance of Al-Andalus, we need to understand what it was about and what was being replaced by, okay? What were the forms of political power, etc., that were in place in both sides, that is in, let's put it this way, in Muslim Europe, and I'm using Europe here in an anachronistic way because at that time even the concept Europe was not used, but just to make a geography, no? I'm talking about the split in Europe between Christian Europe and Muslim Europe that lasted 800 years. And what is the world historical significance of the fall of Al-Andalus? You need to understand what was Al-Andalus about and what was Christian Europe about. To understand then what is being destroyed or what is being replacing what is being destroyed, okay? So I want to go back to the period of Constantine, 4th century, okay? 4th century after Jesus Christ, and you have after 4th century after Jesus, the formation of a form of political power that broke with early Christianity. Early Christianity was, people call it, some scholars call it unitary Christianity. Unitary Christianity because in the early period of Christianity, it has the notion of Tawhid, the notion of unity was there, okay? And in that period, the Christianity was a movement that was, in a sense, it was a spirituality, but at the same time, it has a political effects because with the notion of Tawhid, they were putting in question any kind of idolatric political powers, in this case, the Roman Empire, who pretended to represent itself as some kind of sacred state. With the notion of Tawhid, the Christians were kind of deviling this idolatric form of power, you know, and became a very powerful tool, in a sense, that not only a spirituality, but a tool of political critique. Because as many theologians of liberation in Latin America say, the condition of possibility of critique is to be atheist in relation to state power structures, etc. You need to be atheist towards that. You sacralize that, you will never be critical because you're going to worship structures that have nothing to do with sacredness, are human creation, and therefore submitted to critique. And therefore, so in that sense, in the best prophetic tradition, Christianity was a movement that was critical of shirk, no? Was critical of all these forms of power that pretended to be God on earth, no? And the Roman Empire, to make a long story very short, I'm very simplifying many things, please, basically have to, you know, Constantine, you know, came in and said, okay, you cannot fight them, let's join them. So what Constantine did was to incorporate Christianity as an ideology of the state. In doing this, then he has to transform the theology. He has to move from unitary Christianity to Trinitarian Christianity. And that happens in the 4th century, okay? And this move was a very, very, has a kind of world historical significance because with this move, Constantine put in place a structure in which there's going to be very convenient for the Roman Empire, which first is going to claim to be resacralize the state in the eyes of the people by claiming to be representative of God on earth. And with the idea of Trinity is going to bring a dualism, okay, in which the notion of unity, of Tawhid, is going to be destroyed and replaced by a dualistic notion between the material and the spiritual world. For the powers that be at that time, for Constantine and the Roman Empire, it was very convenient to do this split because, of course, any critique, anything that would challenge the dominant ideas of the Roman Empire on Constantine as an emperor will be pushed to the side of material world, which happened to be then called evil. Okay, is on the side of Satan. Okay, and so the Roman Empire would keep in a sense, the innocence of being the representative of God, one of the spiritual forces on earth. Okay, this structure that seemed to be, very simplistic, and it is very simplistic in many ways, but deductive, at the same time had a very important effect, because that Christian Europe is going to fall into a period of 1,200 years of obscurity in terms of relation to many things, including science, philosophy, critical thought, and so on. Because anything that will be discovered with this dualism in the cosmos, anything new you discover there that will challenge the hegemonic dogmas will be submitted to be accused of being on the side of evil. And if you're on the side of evil, you'll be submitted to crucifixion. Okay? And later, with the fall of the Roman Empire, this structure, idolatric ideology continued when you have the formation of feudal lords across Europe, reproducing the same structure of representing themselves as God on earth, and accusing anybody who criticizes their views, or anybody who will discover doing any kind of experiment in nature and discover something that will challenge the dogmas, will be immediately submitted not to crucifixion but later to being burned alive. Okay, and so accused of being witches and that kind of thing. Okay, so this is a period of obscurantism that produced, in a sense, plumb Christian Europe into a kind of moment of stagnation in many ways, in civilizational ways, in terms of technology, science, philosophy, but also in terms of wealth. I mean, they entered a period also of impoverishment, etc., isolation from the rest of the world, etc., etc. No? And you have the notion of God in Christendom emerging after Constantine, where is the image of an old man with a beard floating in a cloud, and watching everybody with a cane and hitting you in the head if you don't behave, etc. So this kind of image of God that is kind of idolatric image, where is a Western man with an old man becoming kind of the image of God. Okay, and with this kind of move that implied an important theological transformation from early Christianity, and the implication it has with science, philosophy, and knowledge, it also has implications for relations with minorities. Okay? For example, people who happen not to share the spirituality of Christendom will be also submitted to suspiciousness, and will be called on the side of evilness. Okay? And so, pushed to the side of evilness, anybody who is practicing any spirituality that is not exactly the hegemonic one. Okay? And people, of course, those who are marginalized this way, also submitted to the possibility of being tortured or being burned alive, or etc., etc. Okay, so this kind of thing, in terms of relation with science, it was a period of obscurity. But in terms of relations with minorities inside the territory, it was also a period of obscurity, because basically it was the slogan of Christianize or kill. Okay? And the kind of political power that was being put in place was the notion of unity without difference. That is, unity without difference. Anywhere this form of political power will be expanding, will impose this rule of having a unity that is considered homogeneous, without diversity in it. Okay? That way, anything difference is pushed outside, is pushed to the side of evil, and therefore submitted to repression. Okay? So the same thing in relation to questions about women. Okay? Questions about women were already also submitted to this form of power that was centered on a very strong patriarchal perspective in Christendom, and women were also considered on the side of difference. So there was this situation where you have also the burning of many women in Europe accused of being witches. Okay? So you have, with this Constantinian transformation, in the post-Constantine period in Christian Europe plumbed into a kind of obscurity that, in a sense, stagnated this side of the world in relation to other parts of the world. Now, I don't have the time to develop this here, but there is this idea of a reconquest. The idea of reconquest implies that there was a previous Muslim conquest of Spain. Okay? Now, I don't have the time to develop that here because I can be for hours, but in the 8th century, with the entrance of Muslims from the south, led by Tariq, was a moment that is being portrayed in Eurocentric history as a Muslim invasion. And in fact, this concept has been challenged because, in fact, there was no Spain in the 8th century. So if there was an invasion, it was not to Spain. It was the Visigoths in power. It was the church that practiced Christendom with the dualism and with the Trinitarian Christendom. The people who were living here, they were Iberian people, that is indigenous people of this land, with different spiritualities, languages, as well as Jews and Unitarian Christians. Those were the people populating this place who were highly dominated, exploited, repressed by this Visigoth Christian alliance. Okay? And many of them asked Muslims for support. And that's how you have the entrance of Muslims from the south in solidarity, in a sense, to the struggles happening here. So I don't have the time to develop this because it would take a long time, just to say that I don't share the thesis of a Muslim invasion of Spain the way it's being portrayed in the literature. In fact, what happened was, if you think about it carefully, in less than 3 years, without airplanes, without any kind of motor vehicle, they liberated the whole territory of the Iberian Peninsula all the way to the south in Poitiers in less than 3 years, without any kind of airplanes or anything like that. So it tells you something about what was happening here in relation to the struggles against this Visigothian power. In a sense, now there's a new literature coming out showing how there was, in a sense, a war of liberation where everybody got together to fight against the power of the Visigoths, who were imposing a form of Christendom. Okay? And so you have Jews, you have Unitarian Christians, as well as Iberian people calling on Muslims in Morocco, asking them to come in to develop a struggle against the power of the Visigoths. But anyway, I stop here about that. Continue into the next centuries, where you have now, with the presence of Muslims in the south of Europe, a challenge to this Trinitarian Christian political power in Europe, in the sense that Muslims, with the notion of Tawhid, brought the possibility of developing sciences without sciences becoming some kind of threat to political power or anything. Because with the notion of Tawhid, the notion of unity, breaking away with this other Constantinian notion of dualism, allow for the possibility of developing sciences, okay, without that being a threat. Anything that you discover in the cosmos is part of the creation of Allah, and therefore it's not something that belongs to, so the idea of materiality and spirituality becomes once again put together in a way that is non-dualistic, is holistic, and as a form of the political effects of this is that it allowed, while in one side of Europe scientists were being burned alive, in the other side scientists were being celebrated. While in the other, one side of Europe philosophers were being burned alive, in the other side of Europe philosophers were being celebrated. Okay? While in one side of Europe minorities were not allowed to practice their spirituality and were submitted to repression, torture, even killing, in the other side of Europe, Muslim Europe, you have the coexistence of multiple spiritualities living together under the rule of Muslim political power. While you have on one side of Europe a very strong patriarchal oppression of women, you have on the other side possibility of women being divorced, having access to property, having access, etc., etc. So you have here a very, very, how can I say, contrast between these two forms of political power. Now, having said this, I don't want you to get the notion that I'm going through this because I want to have some kind of romantic folkloric celebration, because there are many critiques we can do of this period that we can have lessons, okay, learn lessons from that. To begin with, the reason they were defeated militarily by the Christian powers was also due to the divisions that were happening, okay, among Andalusian. Once the Caliphate the Cordoba Caliphate fell, you have the spread of multiple political power fighting each other that was used by the Christian power to divide and rule and put one against the other until finally they conquered the whole territory. So you could see over time also problems, despite these positive aspects that I'm naming in relation to the other form of political power, still there were problems inside the Muslim territories where you have these internal fights among each other that allow Christian power to come in and basically take over, divide and rule, until finally they took over the whole territory. So we can go on about many issues there. I don't want to go into that because I'm not interested so much in having a romantic view of Al-Andalus. I'm interested in understanding what is the world historical significance of the fall of Al-Andalus. That is, the methods that were put in place by the Christian monarchy centered in Castilla, that in the conquest of Al-Andalus, the methods put in place were the following. First, they put in place something called the encomienda. The encomienda is a form of exploitation of labor that put the Muslim and also Jews that were conquered in the process of destruction of Andalusian Muslim power in this territory into a form of coerced labor called the encomienda. What happened was that they would be expropriated from the land, expropriated from their properties, and there would be Christians brought from the north to take over the territories, and then put the indigenous people to work, Muslim, Jews, etc., to work by force in this system. Okay? This, in the literature today, we call it settler colonialism. Okay? This began in the conquest of Al-Andalus, okay, way back. And this method was extrapolated to the Americas and to other parts of the world for the next 500 years, all the way till Palestine today. You could see in Palestine today, this same method put in place, okay, which is called in the literature settled colonialism. But in particular, in that moment, they were using this system called the encomienda. The encomienda will be a form of exploitation of labor, but also the encomendero, the person in charge of exploiting the labor and taking the property away from the indigenous people in the land, is in charge of also of Christianization. So the encomendero have these two roles, exploitation of labor and Christianization by force of those who stay in the territory. Basically, the logic was everywhere the Christian monarchy conquered territory, it will impose the logic of one state, one identity, one population. Here you have also the seeds of what we later know as the nation state. Okay? One state, one identity, one population. We know that the concept of nation state had created more problems than solutions. And this was the early stage of this moment. You could see in the conquest of Al-Andalus, where the Christian monarchy was imposing this notion of the identity of the state corresponding to the identity of the population. If you were Muslim or Jew, the only way you could stay in the territory is by converting by force. If you did not convert by force, you were submitted to being killed, or you had to run away, and escape to Muslim lands north of Africa, in the Maghreb. And we have to remember this because today, Zionist historians, Orientalist historians will be telling you that the conflict is Palestine. Palestine is a conflict of 1,000 years of Muslim intolerance towards Jews, and Muslim being the most anti-Semitic, and so on. When in fact, over history, we could see where the Jews were escaping to from European Christian Europe pogroms, all the way from the Crusades to Second World War, was to Muslim lands, because in Muslim lands Jews have a recognition of rights and possibility of living in an autonomous life without having their spirituality being destroyed. Okay? So this is something we need to say just as a commentary or parenthesis, given the kind of propaganda that we hear these days. But at that moment, where did Jews escape from the conquest of Al-Andalus? They went to North Africa. Okay? They went to Muslim lands. So at that moment, they were imposing the encomienda, imposing forced labor with forcing people to convert. So the encomendero were in charge of those who stay that are forced to conversion will be under the system of the encomienda. Then you will have a form of political power imposing the idea of one state, one spirituality, one identity, and impose that in the whole population. Okay? And then you have the other system that I call, this is a form of ethnic cleansing, no? Because you are basically cleansing the territory ethnically from people. Today we call this genocide, but it was a form of ethnic cleansing, pushing people away from the land by force, killing people, and then occupying the land with the colons coming from the north. Okay? And so this was not only a form of ethnic cleansing, but there's a third method used that I will use the term of Boaventura de Sousa Santos, epistemicide. They were burning the libraries. Wherever they went and conquered territory, they will burn the libraries. Keep in mind that the Cordoba library had more than 500,000 books at a moment when Christian Europe's largest library did not have 1,000 books. Okay? This gives you some idea about the unevenness there of both civilization. No? You have in the site of Cordoba more than 500,000 books in the library. It was burned. Here in Granada, in the Plaza Virrambla, here downtown Granada, they burned the Library of Granada, more than 250,000 books. Okay? It's curious to see that in Berlin, in the plaza where they were burning books, the Nazis, there are some kind of monuments in memory of this atrocity. Okay? I invite all of you to go to Virrambla Plaza and let me know where you see any monument, anything remembering this, okay, as an atrocity. In any case, what you see here in the city of Granada is a celebration of the conquest. Okay? And you could see that in the famous monument where you see there Columbus on his knees, okay, with the Queen. I don't know if you have the chance to see that yet, but it's a huge monument in the center of Granada where you see Columbus on his knees asking Queen Elizabeth, the Catholic, the royal authority on the resources to conquer the Americas. Okay, so in any case, what you have in Granada is still today, 500 years later, a celebration of that history, not a critical view of that history. So these methods of genocide, epistemicide, okay, ethnic cleansing of the territory, practicing settler colonialism, and epistemicide, destruction of knowledge, okay, these methods, I'm saying, has world historical significance because these are the methods that are going to be then globalized in the conquest of the Americas and in the conquest of other parts of the world. And so that's why I'm saying we have to look at the conquest of Al-Andalus not in a romantic or folkloric way. We need to look at it at the world historical significance of this event in relation to what happened elsewhere. Okay? And so this is why I think that we need to look at it in a sense, in a profound and serious way, and look at the weaknesses that Muslim political power at the time had in the sense of divide and rule. They were fighting each other among themselves, and that created the weaknesses that allowed the Christian monarchy to divide and rule. That is, take one against the other, and this one against that one, until finally they conquer the whole territory. The last remaining sultanate of that history is Granada, and the fall of Granada was January 2nd, 1492. Okay? January 2nd, 1492. In the first meeting between Columbus and the king and the queen, before the fall of Granada, Columbus went there with the enterprise of the Indies. Remember, Columbus thought he was going to India. That's a long thing to discuss because he was going to with Chinese maps in his hand that cartographed the world, and no European could read those maps, and he thought that North, Central, and South America that shows in those maps as an extension peninsula of China. Okay, so in those maps the Pacific Ocean gets shrink, but he thought that was India, so he called it India. So he thought he was going to India, going that way, okay, crossing the Atlantic. But that's another story. The point is that you could see that many of the conquerors of the navigators of the Conquest were all Italians, because all those maps were coming to Italy through the missions of the Vatican in China. And so all these navigators from Italy had these maps from which they were able then to sell this, the idea that they could get there and get to this new territory that Columbus thought it was India. Okay, so when they at that moment you have then January in the first meeting before the fall of Granada, the Queen tells Columbus, you need to wait for this until the fall of Granada. Once the fall of Granada, we would be able to unify the whole territory in terms of one political authority, one identity, one state. Once we do that, then we can move on, okay, in the project to go over there. That's fine, but let's wait until we finalize the conquest of Al-Andalus. Okay? Then the second meeting is when, after January 2nd, with the fall of Granada, Columbus comes to one of the rooms of Alhambra here, because remember, the king and the queen moved their center of power here to Granada, to Alhambra. They took over the Alhambra Palace, and that's where they start putting their court there. And in one of the rooms there was a meeting, January 11, 1492, 9 days after the fall of Granada, between Columbus and Queen Elizabeth, where Queen Elizabeth is giving the resources as well as the royal authority to go ahead with the enterprise of the Indies. When they arrive to the Americas, that's a long conversation to have that I don't have the time to develop, just to say that you have the formation there, all the methods they have used in the conquest of Al-Andalus, they brought them with them over there. To begin with, many of the conquerors, Hernán Cortés, Pizarro, many of them have gone through the wars of conquest of Al-Andalus before going there. So Cortés, for example, is very famous because in his letters, Hernán Cortés, the conqueror of Mexico, he would put there the temple of the Aztecs. He would call them mosques. Okay? He would say, oh, here are the mosques, because they come with the imagination of the conquest of Al-Andalus. And they were seeing Moros everywhere they went, Moors. They would see Moors everywhere they went. And of course, all the methods they put in place here, they brought them there. So the encomienda was extrapolated there. Okay? The methods of destruction of libraries, burning libraries, was extrapolated there. They burned the codices and the quipus, and it's important to say that the indigenous civilization of the Americas were quite advanced in relation to our Europe had. Okay? No city in Europe, with the exception of Cordoba, that was on the side of Al-Andalus, had 1 million people in the city. Okay? The largest city in Europe has 60,000 people. Indigenous people in America have cities of more than 1 million people. That tells you something in terms of technology, etc. I don't have the time to develop, but just to say, these were not isolated places. There was already trade and communication between indigenous civilization in the Americas with Africans, Muslim Africans, Andalusians, with China, with Pacific Ocean indigenous people. They were connected to the world, and they have a lot of civilizational advances in terms of medicine, in terms of the Maya calendar was the most precise calendar in the world by the time, by 1492. So they have a lot. This is not isolated places of primitive people, this kind of Eurocentric ideas. what happened was that they encountered their very, very wealthy civilizations, and that was part of the, of the motivation. Just imagine that the central city of the Aztecs was a city with more than 1 million people, and the metal they used in architecture was gold. Okay? So you have bridges, buildings, etc., with not only stones but also gold. And so imagine Europeans coming from impoverished, isolated, obscurantist Europe and finding cities, built on gold. So Hernán Cortés described all of this in his letters, and when he arrived there. And so I'm just saying this because a lot of the narrative we have is colonial Eurocentric narratives that give us very, very distorted ideas of what was going on in those places. Anyway, so when Columbus arrived to the Americas and the project of the Americas, of conquering the Americas continued, there is a new topic that emerged, and that's the topic of who are these people, if they have a soul or not. The whole question, okay, these people have no religion. I learned this from Nelson Maldonado Torres, who is here at the back, who have done work doing these comparisons about how the question, the first thing that Columbus puts in his diary when he stepped out of the boat in October 12, 1492, is he said, my God, these are people without religion. And then people without religion, today, if I say these are people without religion, you might think I'm saying they're atheists. But in the 15th century Christian imaginary, people without religion have a different connotation. It was not that they're atheists. It was people, human beings have religion. You might have the wrong one. You might have the wrong God, the inferior God. I will impose the correct one on you, but you're still a human the moment that I can convert you to my religion. So that idea was still ambiguously, it was a kind of proto-racist idea, because it was not fully racist, because the idea of conversion was still there. But what happened when they arrived to America and they put this concept of people without religion? People without religion is people without God. People without God is people without a soul. And if you don't have a soul, you're like an animal in nature. And therefore, it's justified to enslave you. It's like taking a cow or a horse and putting it to work in the labor process, and it's not a sin in the eyes of God. So you have this narrative emerging and becoming a huge debate that goes all the way to mid-16th century, Las Casas Sepúlveda debate in Valladolid in the mid-16th century, where the Spanish Empire put in the hands of a Christian theological tribunal the decision about, okay, are these people is the conquest justified or not? In that time, the authority of knowledge and jurisprudence was in the hands of the church, and so it was Las Casas and Sepúlveda. Sepúlveda basically arguing for people without soul, and Las Casas arguing for the notion of barbarians to be Christianized. This was the debate. Both agreed they are barbarians. The question was, on one side, these are animal-like people, and therefore justified to, all these atrocities are justified. And on the other side was La Casa saying this is not justified because it's true they are savages, it's true they are barbarians, but they have a soul, and therefore our task is to Christianize them. This here you have the emergence for the next 450 years of the two main discourses used by European imperial power in their colonial expansion. On the one hand, you have the Sepúlveda line, people without soul, secularized in the 19th century, okay, when the authority of knowledge passed from theology to science, secularized into people without the human DNA. So from people without soul to people without the human DNA. In the Las Casas argument, primitive people, barbarians to be Christianized in the 19th century with anthropology and social pseudosciences or social science turned into primitive to be civilized. You could see here the secularization of the Christian theology into the pseudosciences of the 19th century, the Sepúlveda line becoming people without soul to people without the human DNA with biology and natural science, the Las Casas line, becoming people, barbarians to be Christianized, turning in the 19th century with anthropology and social science into primitive to be civilized. You could see how there is a shift in terms, but the content is a continuation of the same, because both are racist discourses. Today, we identify in the social science, in the literature, these two lines as biological racist discourse and culturalist racist discourses. Okay? So, but it goes back to 16th century debates, okay, on the conquest of the Americas in Spain. But what happened is, and with this I'm going to finish, is that you're going to have, in the conquest of the Americas, we have seen how the methods of the conquest of Al-Andalus were brought there. Now we're going to see how the new things emerging in the conquest of America are going to come back and redefine the conquest of Al-Andalus. Because now, Moriscos, that is the descendants of the Muslims, who happen to be now second, third, fourth generation, now they're Christians, born Christians, okay? They're going to be, the idea, this notion of people without soul is going to come back. And now they're going to say, Moriscos are people without, they're soulless people. Sujetos desarmados, soulless people. So the concept of soulless people is something that emerged from the conquest of the Americas. It's going to come back and redefine the old Islamophobia and Judeophobia of religious medieval discrimination in Europe and turn it into racial discrimination. Because now in the 16th century here in Al-Andalus, in Andalusia, in the conquest of Andalusia, they're going to now call people descendants of Muslims people without soul, and therefore justify their enslavement, etc., etc., until finally they expel them in 1609. But now they're going to push Moriscos, who are now Christians, Marranos, who are now Christians, Marranos are the convert Jews, are going to be pushed on the side of the animal world, okay? Dehumanized, below the line of the human, with the narrative coming from the debates of the Americas. And this is the moment, 16th century, Andalusia, with the conquest of Andalusia, where these narratives coming from the conquest of the Americas redefine medieval religious discrimination into racial discrimination. Because now it's not that you have the wrong God or the wrong theology. It's that people who pray to the inferior God, people who practice inferior religion, they are themselves inferior, because now the questioning is a more fundamental questioning about the humanity of those subjects. Now it's not the theology. Now it doesn't matter how much acts of demonstration you make about your conversion to Christianity is irrelevant, because now the questioning is more fundamental. It's not a theological questioning, it's a question about your humanity. And from here is the moment in history where you have a sharp discontinuity from Islamophobia, Judeophobia of the medieval times into modern Judeophobia, Islamophobia that is racial. Because the question is not anymore about the theory, it's more about your humanity. Okay? And these relationships are important to look at historically, because a lot of these discourses are still pretty much alive in the world today, and especially where, in European territories today, you have still a continuity of these discussions, okay, with Islamophobia, developing in very crazy ways. And there are many scholars present here, Salman Sayyid, Tariq Ramadan, and many others here, Julia Butella, Nelson Maldonado Torres, who have developed and talked a lot about this contemporary moment. And so I just want to, I'm going to stop here, because you have read probably the article that was circulated where I discussed the implication of this genocide epistemicides they did in Andalusia, they did in America, they did against women in Europe being burned alive, accused of being witches, for modern epistemology. Where what happened is that the modern world was built upon the shoulders of coloniality, of enslavement of other people around the world, and how the modern epistemology then was built on the idea that only Western men have access to universality, have access to superior knowledge, and the rest of the world, including women, including Western women, are considered inferior. So by the time Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, and think of himself as a God I view, that is this idolatric universalism, Cartesian idolatric universalism, by the time this happened, this I, it was very clear in the common sense of the time, who is this I? It couldn't be a Muslim or a Jew after the conquest of Al-Andalus. It couldn't be an African or indigenous people after the conquest of the Americas. It couldn't be a woman after the burning alive of thousands of women in Europe accused of being witches. Who is left? Western men as the only sole authority of knowledge and the privilege of knowledge, inferiorizing now the knowledge of everybody else. And the moment you inferiorize the knowledge of everybody else, then you put out a structure in which not only I know, me Western man, I know what is reality and what is truth, but I know what is best for you. Because no matter what you say is good for you, your knowledge is inferior to me. And so I know what is best for you. And if I know what is best for you, then no matter what you say, it's irrelevant. So we went from Christianize or I kill you in the 16th century, and I know what is best for you. I try to convince you that Christianity is the way. You're not convinced, then you have to kill you to save your soul from your barbarianism. I'll kill you. 19th century, civilize or I'll kill you. You are an obstacle to progress, to civilization, and I know what is best for you. Doesn't matter what you say is best for you. I know my knowledge is superior to you, and therefore if I need to kill you because you are putting obstacles to progress and civilization, I'll kill you. So you have millions of people killed in the 19th century in the name of civilization, or I'll kill you, especially indigenous people around the world, because they were perceived as obstacles to progress and civilization. And you could see that in the colonial expansion, European colonial expansion all over the world. 20th century, develop or kill you. I know what is best for you. You are a backward country. You don't know what development is. Here is the recipe. You don't know, you're not convinced. Okay, then we have to impose on you the project of development. Here you have coup d'etat all over the world, a coup d'etat organized to impose developmentalist dictatorships all over the world, not only Latin America. You can see that in Africa and Asia. Just in Indonesia, the first month of the coup d'etat in 1965, they killed 1 million people. Just in Indonesia, the first month of the coup d'etat. Just to give you an idea, we're talking about millions of people killed in the name of develop or kill you. 21st century, I know what is best for you. I know your knowledge is inferior to me, therefore I know what is best for you. Democratize or I kill you. You don't know what democracy is. You're authoritarian. You don't know what is, even though a lot of the dictatorships of this authoritarian were put during the period of develop or I kill you, were put in place and financed by many countries of the West, including the USA. Now you have the democracy or I kill you, and again, bringing democracy to countries with airplanes, military airplanes and tanks, etc. So what I'm trying to say with this is see how this epistemology that is racist, sexist, and say racist, sexist to inferiorize the knowledge of the rest of the world, it put the Western man knowledge as superior to the rest, okay? See how this is at the center of power structures in the world today, okay? And how this is constitutive of the power structure and imperial colonial projects still going on today, okay? So this is what I wanted to say. With that, I want to say there are many angles I'm not talking about here for lack of time. Like, for example, we need to see also not only a critique to the West, but also a critique to ourselves, because there are also colonial structures that we have swallowed in our perspective epistemologies that now are recycled as some kind of authentic Islam or authentic indigenous knowledge or whatever. We need to also pay attention to this because colonization was not just a project that happened there, it happened inside us. And so part of decolonization is also decolonizing ourselves and decolonizing our nafs. I'll stop here.
Maybe there is one or two questions or three questions, and then we'll go.
I have a question. Thank you, Professor. First of all, I read your article, and my deep thanks, first of all, for the theme that you differentiate in your article Christendom and Christianity as a faith and the political trend. So, don't you think that in the current Islam, modern Islam, there is one dimension which tries to repeat or replicate what Christendom was trying to do to the Islamic world in the past. So I'm talking about Islamism and militant fundamentalism. So if you're praying, there are many characteristics similar to that time. If you're praying to the wrong God, so it justifies need to kill you. And it's not only about Christians, but also about other Muslims who, following, from my perspective, the wrong way of worshipping. You have the wrong knowledge, so I want you to impose my knowledge upon you. How to follow, how to interpret the Quran, how to worship God, and even the idea of Chauki. So don't you think that's a similar way?
This is why I ended up saying that colonization is not just something that comes from outside and that's it. It's that after several hundred years of colonial power, in a sense, we are all affected by it. What that means is that all the culture of the world, all the spiritualities have been, in a way, touched by this. That means that you will find inside our own tradition, different traditions, spiritual traditions, also modifications that come from colonial history. Okay? So I can tell you that, for example, you could see one example is certain versions of Islam that takes, for example, forms of reading the Quran that are quite similar to the ways you see Protestant fundamentalists reading the Bible. And this is not the link, okay, from colonial history. You see some kind of correlation between British colonialism and the presence of this kind of readings. Not that it didn't exist before colonization. Of course, there exist trends inside land before that have this kind of lines. But the way it's being, in a sense, potentially concentrated, during the before-after colonization, I think is a very important moment because you see how these structures coming from British colonialism, coming and leaving some kind of trace behind internally to the culture of the colonized people, to the point that then these things become kind of hidden history and recycled as some kind of authentic indigenous culture or Islamic culture or whatever. Okay, so we need to pay attention both to the outer structure, inner structure at the same time. Having said that, doesn't leave the responsibility that we all have, okay, away, because the fact that this happened due to colonial history doesn't mean now that we say, oh, this is the fault of the West, and now we wash our hands. No. You could trace the history in colonial history, but at the same time, there is responsibility, because now we cannot think of the West as something out there. The West is inside us. In that sense, the challenge of the modern colonial world is that it's not that easy to decolonize, because to decolonize is not just transforming a power structure over there, it's ourselves carrying over internal structures that reproduce a lot of the problems that we are trying to fight against, you see? And so that's why there have to be, as part of the decolonial project, not only a struggle to decolonize the power structure, but also a struggle to decolonize our minds, our knowledge, our epistemology, but also our spirituality, our hearts. There's no way out to have decolonization without decolonization, spiritual decolonization. If you attempt to transform the outer structure without transforming in a structure, you're just going to reproduce again, you know, with the best intention of the world, everything you're fighting against, because you carry that inside you.
I have a question. Broadcasting accident event alone.
Ask your question and the other one.
Okay, I have a short comment and question. A comment that it's very interesting, these two ideas of number one, globalization of this the conquista model, especially transferring this to the Indies and South America. And the other one is secularization also of these. But I have a problem also as a student of history of religion. It always strikes me that the way the historical clash between Islam and Christianity ended at the end of the 15th century. I always said that it's ended up with time. But we call in Arabic hadaf ta'al. The same years that Christians took Granada, Muslims took Constantinople. The same year that Christians took the western part of Mediterranean, Muslims took the eastern part. Christian converted the Mosque of Cordoba into cathedral, and Muslims converted Hagia Sophia into a mosque. So, what does this tell us about religious wars in general, the destiny of religious wars, especially that we are suffering today in Muslim societies, and internal religious wars between Sunni and Shia? Now, I think it's not only about colonization, it's more than that. It has deeper roots before the colonization. All of these religious wars, how they ended, are they really fruitful? Did we lose as much as we gained from this kind of wars set up? Well, I like the way you connected the fall of Granada to Columbus, but also I like to be connected to what happened in the Eastern Mediterranean. Thanks.
I didn't have time to read your text, sorry. But after my meetings about the history of Andalus, I think that the other part of the reason of Andalus' fall is also a Muslim responsibility. It has been a big difference between the first leaders like Lazhar or Musa ibn Musayyib, who made the conquest of Andalus, and between the fall of Andalus and the leaders who led Andalus to the Christians. So, what are the lessons we can take from our responsibility in this time? Because I feel like history is like begins all around when we see our political situation today. It's like I feel like it's very similar. And the other question is, I'm wondering, and even in my work, how can we, our generation, empower new leaders to be a political, economic power again, or a new one with critical thinking. We are in summer school about this. So well.
These are big questions. I hope that in the next days we'll be able to go into all of this. But basically, you're absolutely right. That's what I was trying to say by saying that we need to look also critically at that history, because it's not just that there was a power, conquering. There were witnesses, and there was responsibility for the Muslim here in why the Andalus fell. So, and that have a lot of lessons that we can learn. And think also about the situation of today, in which you have crazy divisions going on, and of course play in the hands of the powers that be. Again, you could see how at that time was playing in the hands of the Christian monarchy. Today is playing in the hands of certain imperial projects in the region, that are, of course, promoting and inflating all these things to make them, to get this kind of crazy civil wars, etc. Get Muslims killing other Muslims. So these are things that we have responsibility. There is a responsibility of people, in that sense. But on the other hand, there are also world power contexts also putting the fuel there. You see, but the fuel won't work if you have on the other side people have, in a sense, moved beyond this kind of crazy divisions. But this is why it takes two to tango. But anyway, coming back to your question, I don't think we can compare, and I am very critical of trans-historical analysis, where you take something that happened here and then extrapolate over there and think that this is the same. Okay? And there, in Eurocentric historiography and thinking, there is a tendency to do this kind of trans-historical universalist thing and think that from Adam and Eve, there's been slavery, from Adam and Eve time, there's been empire, from Adam and Eve, and then everything turned into kind of a universalism that turned into human nature, and if it's human nature, there's nothing we can do. See, so this, I'm very critical of that, because there are, in a sense, qualitative moments in history in the sense of shift. For example, you cannot compare the Ottomans with the European colonial expansion at all. Because with the Ottomans, you have a foreign political power in which you have the possibility of multiplicity of culture, etc., inside the structure of power. It was not the idea of one identity, one state, one people, okay? It was a multiplicity. That later, at the end, you get the Turks becoming more central, etc., as part of the process of demise of the Ottomans. But in general, you see over the trend of the Ottoman that was not there. Today, if you go to over here, you don't find traces except in the last 40, 50 years of either immigrants or Spaniards who are now reverting to Islam. There's no trace of the people of that time, and preserving any mosque or synagogue or anything from the time. Well, you have our museums. You go to Portugal, but you could go to Istanbul, and you can find Jewish community, and you can find Christians, and you can find. So the Ottomans never exterminated difference. You see, that happened here. They exterminated difference. So you need to put in context. I'm not defending that they destroyed the Sophia and turned it into a mosque. Not defending it, but we need to put things in proper context and not flatten down history in a way that then everything is the same. This idea that everything that moves is empire, okay, Aztec Empire, Ottoman Empire. Why are we using these terms? Because we're so Eurocentric in our normal way of thinking, the kind of, it has become kind of common sense to call empire everything in the world. Why if we turn this upside down? We say the Spanish Sultanate, the British Sultanate, the French Sultanate. You see the point? What I'm trying to get at? I mean that shocks us, but it doesn't shock us. It doesn't create a shock to us if I said the Aztec Empire, the Ottoman Empire. No, wait a minute. This was a Sultanate.
British Caliphate.
Or the British Caliphate. Yes. You see the point? But we are so Eurocentric in the common sense that we call the Aztecs an empire, we call the Ottoman Empire, everything's an empire, you see? And so this kind of thing we need to be careful, and it's very easy to slip into this tendency to then flatten down history and just make everything a continuation of what the West have done, you see? And that's not the case. Anyway.
Thank you.
Enslavement. How was